Yeah, let's get a round of applause for everybody doing the great work, speaking our hearts out. So, we're here today, very grateful, in a state of gratitude. So we're gonna begin, this plenary session. And for everybody, my name is Jocelyn Gamma. I am from Oakland, California. Woo, woo. Let's go. So I'm gonna be opening up this session with another poem. And this poem is called She is Oakland and I Am. So gonna begin now. Thank you guys. I'm so grateful to be able to share my art with you guys. And thank you guys for being here. As I've been saying, I feel that us doing this work, I feel that it's really important to use creativity as a form of expression and also political resistance. And that's what I really dedicate my time to do. So I'm gonna begin. I am from 38th and Fruitville District. From the hood, my dad spent decades selling tamales block to block to survive. And from where the Brown Berets and Black Panthers organized the free breakfast program. I'm from East Oakland. I'm from waking up 5 a.m. to go to el rancho para ordeñar, the hustle breed of Las Gamas, from the block where the crime rates go up, but each day we live to resist against systemic oppression, and I am from no justice and no peace. I am from my mom's cooking gracious tamales, from high feet grace and universal laws, from la cultura cura, Baja Vista, and la Virgencita. I'm from where you go dumb and then you hit the sneeze. I'm from multi-dimensional beings. And I'm adding it up. This one is She is Oakland. She is Oakland. From the bottom to the top, I stand rooted in my city. Unlike a candle, I'm lit to infinity. Beautiful butterfly, I glide with grace, dignity, and serenity. Ancestors, hear me? I'm claiming my identity. Listen attentively. Cal student watching gentrification transform my streets. Straight from the town, so my lingo sound differently. It may sound different. Straight from Mexico, you can hear the accent in me. Don't get offended if I call you bruh unintentionally. Code switching is real, bruh. A diamond in the rough, the struggles are tough. It gets foggy in my city. Political practice hurting my city. We really gotta build our committee. I seen it firsthand, police got no pity. School pipeline, police brutality, racist cops receiving zero time under legality. Discrepancies of constitutionality got brown communities and black and brown communities in captivity. I really can't believe this is reality. Cuffs and chains, spaces, not knowing the soul is so divine, despite if it's bloodline. Systems structured to oppress and suppress, I suggest you to begin to dispose this white privilege. Marginalized communities can access, and my brothers and sisters, we don't gotta deal with no house arrest. Oakland, California, where the poor get forced out, fighting racist Americans with Lake Merritt cookouts. Turfing dancers going dumb, hyphy and educated, and we still overcome. Whole lot of Oakland and Bay Area talent I see while I'm walking down Lake Merritt, feeling the breeze. Feeling the breeze with my hot Cheetos and cheese. Goals so attainable, brave enough to reach. Just like Tupac said, you can't let up, and you are the rose that grew from concrete. Ambitious to defeat my future Congress race. There's a story under all our case, and we really gotta use it to reclaim our space. And East Oakland, I'll represent one of these days. Thank you. I appreciate y'all. I really appreciate you guys. And so now we're gonna get started, and I want to welcome Dr. Davis. San Francisco. Let's give it up, let's give it up, let's give it up. Y'all feel the energy? I feel the energy.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Oh, okay, over there, that's right. I am super excited for this panel because we've been doing some really cool things in San Francisco, and so I'm looking forward to the conversation. I want to invite up the panelists for today, and I will say we had some changes and some shifts, and a couple folks aren't here, and I'm like, this is amazing. We have like all the S's on the panel today. That worked out with President Shamann Walton joining us. Yeah. Dr. Saeeda Leia Tatufu Birch has agreed to kind of stand in. We've got Starr Williams joining, our young person representing, and myself, Cheryl, with an S, not a C. Just remember that. So I'm super excited to begin this conversation. And as those folks take their seat, I will just give a little bit of background and framing for you all. So here in San Francisco, we have a black mayor, London Breed, all right? Yeah, I know Valerie is going, she gonna make sure. And we have the Board of Supervisors, and the president of the Board of Supervisors here in our city and county of San Francisco is Shamann Walton. Yeah. Both of them born in the city, both of them have deep roots and ties here, and when everybody else was talking about Black Lives Matter and we need to invest in the black community over the last 2 years, not everybody has seen that materialize, but here in San Francisco, Mayor Breed and President Walton made a commitment to invest and support and put money in the black community. And they did that to the tune of $60 million a year. They made that commitment, and then because it was mid-year when they first made that promise, the first year we rolled out $120 million for black folks, defined and distributed and kind of decided where it was going to go by black folks. So I want to thank you, President Walton, for that leadership. And so the other thing that President Walton led was the resolution and ultimately the creation of the Reparations Advisory Task Force here in San Francisco, with a focus on hearing from community what it is that they want to have done, what does reparations look like, what does that conversation look like, and how are we informing that? So putting together a 15-member body, went through the process of folks applying, having to come out and really talk about why they wanted to be on the committee. The committee was created, and now they're in the process of having community meetings and having conversations, and Starr Williams is one of our young people that is sitting on that body and helping to inform that process. So I want to recognize and thank Starr for her leadership. And Starr was just telling me, I've known Starr since before she was born. And she was just telling me that she is going to prom this weekend, and in the fall she's going to UCLA. So, and she's going to study political science because she wants to be able to make a difference in the community and to really talk about the things that she saw as lacking and want to make that change. So I want to just recognize and celebrate you, Starr. And then Dr. Saeeda Leia Tatufu Birch is the inaugural director of the Dreamkeeper Initiative, which is overseeing the $120 million, $60 million annually. Saeeda is from San Francisco and has been amazing and has done tremendous community work and brings that commitment and that lens. And I always am like trying to, she's educating me in so many different ways, but I always love when she talks about being black and Samoan, and I love the way that she says that and like is really, you know, teaching us all about like identity and owning that and being able to celebrate that. But in the same way, she brings that racial equity lens to this work. So I just want to recognize and thank you, Dr. Sai. And so I think one of the things that we really struggle with when we talk about work and wanting to move it forward, and I was just telling Saeeda this the other day, I have to work on, because usually when I first meet people and I hear about their programs, I say, well, I just want to say hello and just be honest that I've been really critical of your program. But part of the challenge is that when we do this work, so often folks come in and they tell us how things should work or the ideas that they have, and we sometimes get removed from what it looks like to actually implement that work. And so the Reparations Advisory Committee is an amazing idea, and reparations is something that folks have been talking about forever, and it's finally kind of, I use the language, mainstreamed. It's finally in a place where we can talk about it and people don't laugh and say, what are you talking about? But how do we actually move that forward? Right? It's not just the will of the people, but it's also the leadership of policymakers and systems leaders, and I think that that is the role that President Walton plays. Coming from community, making the commitment, and not just saying that I'm going into politics to change the system so it's better than it was for me, but actually going in to do that. And so as we begin this conversation, I wanted to start actually with President Walton on, like, where did you get the gumption to even think that it was okay to recommend that San Francisco, which is less than 6% black, should have a reparations advisory committee and actually consider giving money back to black folks?
Well, first I want to start off by saying Director Davis is being very modest because she's actually been a part of this work every single step of the way. Even prior to her being appointed to the Human Rights Commission and me getting elected to the Board of Supervisors, we worked hard to create Black to the Future, which has a focus on making sure that we look at the entire family. So this work that we were able to do with the Dreamkeeper Initiative and also with reparations obviously started before we both got in these roles, but I want to make sure I acknowledge her part and her leadership in all of this fight as well. But like Dr. Davis said, it's no secret that we've been fighting for reparations in this country for hundreds of years. And so this conversation did not start with me as a member of the Board of Supervisors. It really started as a groundswell in community. Then we started to see more and more on social media all of the ills that we suffer as black people, whether it's being criminalized by folks calling 911 on us just for doing our everyday things, whether it's the fact that we are highly represented in the penal system, whether it's the fact that we have the least amount of home ownership here in our own city, whether it's the fact that we have redlining. This is something that has always been a conversation at the table. And so being able to be in a role where I can say, wait a minute, how can we make sure that we come up with a strategy and a plan that's going to address the systemic and systematic wealth gaps that exist for black people and all of the negative outcomes that exist for black people and communities. So we began to working together with, of course, leaders like Director Davis and members of her team on the Human Rights Commission, also worked closely with my colleagues to develop first a resolution that says we are going to find a way to achieve reparations here in San Francisco. After the resolution was developed, we continued to do the work. We actually had a lot of sessions in communities because we wanted to make sure that the community led the process, wanted to make sure that they were at the table, and quite frankly, make sure that it was 100% black-led and 100% about black people. So we started having these sessions in community and saying, what is the definition of reparations, right? We gotta have a common definition of what reparations is. Then we also have to identify what areas of injustice we want to address. So we had a few forums across the city, and we got hit with the pandemic right during that process. So we did have enough information from community to at least look at what injustices we wanted to address and kind of formatted that common definition. And once we did that, my team got together and we wrote the reparations legislation that set up a 15-member working group with, as you can see, we have young people who are part of the process, we have members from the clergy, we have historians, people from academia, and all 15 of these folks are obviously black folks that we were able to work through a selection process and bring on board, and now they're in the thick of doing the work to get us to a point where we achieve reparations. Their job is to look at all these injustices, look at the opportunities, and come up with a plan and a package that's gonna come up with some tangible outcomes and some tangible ways that we can achieve reparations. A lot of people think reparations is just about, hey, let's give everybody a check and then go on about your business. But obviously we've had too many ills that we suffered as a black community, not only across this country, but even here in San Francisco. So we need to do some things that are gonna really address the systemic issues, the systemic racism, the systematic oppression that we suffer from as black people. So it could look like every black student who graduates from high school in San Francisco goes to college here for any institution for free. It could look like making sure that any black person who wants to own a home in San Francisco receives a down payment so that they can get home ownership. Because again, if we look at all of the negative outcomes, we are most certainly overrepresented with less than 6% of the population, with highly represented in all the negative outcomes that exist in this city. So the task force is hard at work right now. They did come out with their first report at the beginning of this year that talks about the plan and the framework as they move forward, and just excited about what we're going to be able to come up with over the whole duration of the 18-month process. So then we can work on how we're going to monetize whatever strategies the Reparations Committee comes up with.
Thank you. Before I go to Starr, I wanted to just hit on a couple things that President Walton talked about the committee. And what's awesome about the committee is that there needed to be a seat for someone who was formerly unhoused. There needed to be a seat for somebody who was formerly incarcerated or connected or touched by the justice system. And so just before we move on to Starr, I wanted to just hit on this idea about like repairing, and when we talk about reparations or restoration or even transformation and using the funding for that, a lot of folks are really like focused in on the cash payments. But some of the things that you talk about are systemic, and that if we do just give folks only the money but we don't change some of the systemic pieces, we're setting folks to be right back in the same place. So I didn't know if you wanted to say more on that.
Definitely, again, I mean, we can start with even the gaps in achievement for black young people in our education system here and SFUSD. We can look at the lack of home ownership and how we've been gentrified and pushed out to the point where our population is so small. And so the only way to address those issues is to really attack them straightforward. And a check is not going to do it, right? You're going to have to be able to do something that says you're guaranteed a quality education. You're going to have to do something that says you're guaranteed an opportunity to address the wealth gap. Most certainly and most commonly, the way that has been done is through property and being able to purchase a home so that you can pass it on from generation to generation, which of course is just one aspect of wealth, but we know it's something that has been the most common. And if people say, as we have a conversation about really getting systemic about how we address the ills that exist, this goes back hundreds of years here in this country. I mean, you take someone from their country, you take away their ability to reproduce, you take away their ability to receive an education, you take away their ability to work for a wage, so you obviously take away their ability to earn any wealth. And that transcends from generation to generation and to a point where we're still suffering from the remnants of slavery. But again, it's not just what happened in the South here in this country. We look at redlining and the systematic way they made sure that we were tucked and put in areas where there's high pollution, there's bad air quality. We look at the fact that all the laws were made to criminalize our folks here in San Francisco, whether it be, of course, what happens with the war on drugs and marijuana convictions, which now people are trying to make amends for. You can also look at gang injunctions and what they did to the black community and what they did to the brown community, and the focus on young people of color, particularly young males of color and young black males. So you have to dive deeper than just giving a check. I do 100% believe in universal basic income and do 100% believe that there needs to be a monetary gift that goes to the families that have suffered from these disparities in wealth gaps. So make no mistake about that. But most certainly, we also have to do a lot more, because if we were to try to monetize what was owed to the black community, that number would be too large for us to even achieve.
Thank you. So, hello, Starr. Hello. So, Starr, what made you want to be on the advisory committee? What are you hoping will happen, and how do you think, because you're gonna benefit from this, you know, in a way that many of us are not?
So last year, I applied to the reparations advisory because of my mom, because we were at her job and she was like, oh, they have a committee for reparations, you should apply. I was like, okay, even though like I didn't know if I was going to be effective or not to actually talk about what happened to me in San Francisco, but I got accepted. President Walton, actually, it was between two youth, me and somebody else, and he chose me because I talked about the fact that it's so many injustices in San Francisco, and it's the fact that if we try to just give out checks, it won't work at all, because we will still be going through the same system and we will still be moving out of the city. So what I really want to tackle, since I went through a lot of things in the city that somebody that is under the age of 17 shouldn't be going through, I wanted to change the injustice. Like I went to school that wasn't even in my area. Black children shouldn't have to go to school that's not in their area. They should be having the same opportunity as all their counterparts should. Black children shouldn't be homeless. Why are black children getting kicked out of of their house? Why are we getting the same health care as everybody else is getting? So I want to tackle those issues because that's affect me the most and people in my community.
Thank you, Starr. And I want to linger there a little bit because Starr hit on a couple different things. I don't know if folks know this, but so San Francisco, again, is less than 6% black, but more than 40% of the homeless population is black. And then similar numbers that we see with the incarceration, where again, less than 6% black, but more than 50% of those incarcerated are black, right? And so, and we won't even get into the school district and some of those challenges. You know, Starr, I don't know how much you want, and I know this is something that you talked about, like you came to this from your own personal, but like the challenges with the system and how you really want to see that change and how you feel it so personally. Do you want to share more on that?
Really the education system. So if I moved to Richmond when I was 9 years old, and I didn't realize like how much of the education shift I experienced because I went to a white school in the Avenues, but I didn't go to school in my community where I lived in Fillmore. And so seeing that culture shift is like, I went to a majority black school when I went to Richmond. I was teaching my own class. So I'm like, if this happening in Richmond, this is happening in San Francisco and black communities. So like, we have teachers that do not care about black children, that does not care what they do in the future, that does not care, it's just there for their check and their benefits, and that's it. So if I was experiencing that in Richmond, I'm like, oh no, my cousins, my friends that I left back in San Francisco is experiencing that now. So yeah.
And the last thing I'll just say, because Starr talks about being in the Avenues, that was intentionality, like her mom, right? Like that fight for your mom to actually make that happen.
Yeah.
You know, the benefits, because I think that's the other thing is that the system didn't work for you, your family worked for you.
Yeah. Right.
So in that similar space in terms of like the advocacy, whether that's self or family, Dr. Sai, I think that you really represent, you talk a lot about the ancestors, you talk a lot about like that commitment and that dedication. We were in a session earlier today where folks were talking about like we represent when we show up, past, present, and future. And I feel like you really embody and walk in that and are called to this work in that way.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, Director Davis. So I carry every day that I'm born in between the Atlantic and the Pacific. Mother Africa, where folks were taken and involuntarily boarded ships to come to a country that didn't love us to help build this country, as we talk about enslavement. And also Father Samoa, where folks voluntarily boarded airplanes thinking that there would be opportunity here just to learn that this country did not love us back. And so every day I grapple with living as a black and Samoan woman, and in my father's native tongue, there not being a word for black people. Black people in Samoan are identified as afakasi, which means half one, or meuli, which means black thing. And so how does the work that I do, or how do I remain committed to the fact that my indigenous liberation is not contingent on my black oppression? And so as I do this work every day, I have to carry that. And it's very real conversations that I have not only with family at the table, you know, educating my father's side on what it means to love black people, because it's very real. My first experience with anti-blackness was in my Samoan household. When my mama came home with my dad, my black mama came home with my Samoan dad, and then every uncle after that came home with another black woman, and my grandpa finally had to realize, like, okay, these are my grandchildren too, this is my blood too, so I need to learn how to love black people the way black people love Samoans when we came here. When Samoans came to San Francisco, at least in my family, we landed in a black community, and it was black folks who welcomed us, who made a home for us. And so the nerve of us not to love them back And so those are conversations that I actively have in the household, and that is what is translated into the work that I do on a larger scale, because my fiduciary is to the 50,000 Black folks that are still here, the less than 40,000 Pacific Islanders that are still here in San Francisco, and that's what guides me in this work.
Thank you. And so in that spirit, I wanted to ask all of you, like, how important, as we talk about reparations, as we talk about advancing this work, how important is allyship, or how important are accomplices, like however you frame that? Like, how important, Starr, I see you about to like respond.
I feel like since we are only 5% of the population in San Francisco, we have a big enough voice, but we don't have a big enough voice that we get what we need. So I feel like allyship with our other counterparts, our other neighbors in the city, is very important, because like election is coming up this year, and we don't know what's going to happen. Especially we have a Black mayor that's up for re-election, and we don't know if we're actually going to get reparations. So with allyship, with all our other neighbors helping us with reparations, will be critical for us to fight injustices in San Francisco.
Well, I just want to say, we started this process, number one, because we are unapologetically Black.
All right.
And that's why I made sure the committee was fully Black. And, as a supervisor, it's strange because there are certain things we're not supposed to do. Like, I'm not supposed to be the one that shuts down the media in a press conference. I'm not supposed to be the one that's at the door telling people they can't come in. But that's not how we live, right? And Director Davis can tell you, when we started our community sessions, we would have people who weren't Black who would try to get in the door. And I would be like, you can't come in this space.
He really would.
This is for Black people. And I know that's not supposed to be politically correct, but the reality of it is, until we get on the same page, until we identify what the definition is, until we identify what we want to tackle, that had to happen. With that said, 100% we rely on allyship to do this work. We have suffered for hundreds of years in this country, but other people also suffer. We also cannot get things done without working with people. We're less than 5% of the population, so we have to work together to get things done. And there are people that don't look like me, that are at least supportive of the work, that at the very least understand that we've been treated unjustly here in San Francisco, and they want to do something to help. And they can bring a lot of value to the table. So we work closely with our Latino brothers and sisters. We work closely with our Pacific Islander brothers and sisters. We work closely with our Asian brothers and sisters. In fact, we did, there was a documentary that John Osaki did about reparations for the Japanese community and why it's important for them to support our fight for reparations in the Black community. And I want to commend him for that, because we need everyone to understand why this is so important, not just for Black people, but for America as a whole, to fix what they have broken so systematically, so systemically. And until that happens, we'll never be the country or the city that we want to be in. Allyship is 100% a big part of how we achieve reparations.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Starr?
Yes, I would add to the accomplice piece, in that I was in space. I can't remember what space I was in, both in. So both allyship and accompliship, where on the accomplice end is, if I'm hurting, you're hurting. Like my pain, when I feel pain, my non-Black and Samoan brothers and sisters feel pain. When I experience joy, my non-Black brothers and sisters experience joy. So again, like, collective liberation requires acknowledging and recognizing that there are some folks, specifically Black folks, and let's naming that when we mean it. I have an aversion to BIPOC. I don't mind saying that publicly, because when I say BIPOC, I actually mean Black folks, and I actually mean Pacific Islanders. When I think Indigenous, like, let's say who it is that we're doing this work for, and naming that, and not trying to fight for liberation from a distance. You know, our ancestors, specifically Black ancestors during the Civil Rights Movement, being an accomplice, they were getting arrested together. They were dying together. They were being liberated together. And so that's an accomplice where an ally is also required, can use platforms or use their influence from afar to achieve the same goal. And so I think for me, living as the identity that I shared as a Black and Samoan woman is just as important to be willing to get arrested together, to fight together, and ultimately to be liberated together.
Thank you. Give it up for this. You talk about the civil rights movement. I know yesterday Fred Blackwell was talking a little bit about, you know, his mom talked about civil rights was just a little bit outside of like what motivated her, and Black power became the thing, and he felt like there wasn't necessarily a thing for him to plug into. And so as we are doing this work, as you think about this, like what's the success of it, right? Like what is the thing that on the other side of this, people can say, you'll feel like folks had something to plug into, or they will feel valued, they will feel seen. I think we've talked a lot about like culturally affirming spaces and things we're learning from the Dreamkeeper Initiative. I always go back to, you know, the things that I feel like I learned that helped me be a better person, that were about the arts and the culture and the music and all those things that were rooted and grounded that maybe didn't happen in a formal academic setting, but happened in church where folks were just sitting there and helping each other be better. What's the benefit of the reparations work on the other side of it, beyond the systems change? Like what will look different? Like what's the benefit of the work?
So I can start, like for me, and to your point earlier, Director Davis, in San Francisco, we've had bigger fights outside of just reparations, and it's unfortunate, but a lot of our movements and a lot of the structures that we've created in the past couple of years come from being mistreated or being done wrong. So, for instance, recently we organized SF Block, which is really a collaborative of Black nonprofits working together, and that started because the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development screwed over the Black community in the RFP process, right?
I want y'all to hear, he's giving you very clear how he felt about that.
Right, and it's the 100% truth, but what happened from that is organizations galvanized, they got organized, they came together and created a platform to have conversations and say, never again, and now we're gonna work together instead of work against each other, instead of competing all the time. Let's work together so that we can get the biggest pieces of the resources that are available to us through that process. Of course, we have the Reparations Task Force. Mega Black was developed through this process. I told you about Black to the Future that we started years ago so that we could focus on the entire family unit and have the resources, enough resources, which we actually modeled after the Mission District and the Latino community and Roadmap to Peace, because we wanted to make sure that we had a platform that was resourced, that was really going to provide us an opportunity to change some of those negative outcomes. So I said all that to say we've created a lot of spaces to engage, particularly here in San Francisco, spaces for young people, spaces for people who are leaders in community, spaces for people who are leaders of nonprofit organizations. And so the task force, because it can only be 15 members, that's just one way to play a role in really affecting change and addressing the systemic issues that exist here in the city. And coupled with that, if we say specific to reparations, all of these meetings are public. Everyone has an opportunity to speak and to talk during public comment, to listen, of course, engage with Director Davis and the Human Rights Commission, engage with our office. So these opportunities to engage and affect change do exist, and unfortunately they exist because of all of the wrongs that have happened to us as a community, but most certainly they've allowed for opportunity for us to organize, galvanize, and work together for success in community. What does it look like in the end? Hopefully we start seeing change like tomorrow, right? Not 20 years down the line, not 30 years down the line, because again, we're hundreds of years behind in this work. But for me, it looks like all the negative outcomes that we see changing. It looks like black folks feeling like they can come back to San Francisco. They can afford to live here. They have the resources to go purchase a home. They have opportunity to get the job and the education that they need. And then we start seeing those disparities and those gaps shrink. So we start seeing less black folks being criminalized. We start seeing more black people owning homes. We start seeing more black people get a higher education, or at the very least get the training and skills they need to be able to raise and take care of their family. We start seeing San Francisco have black spaces again, because that has just changed so dramatically, and it's problematic to disintegrate an entire community. And being less than 6% of a population, you know, it just makes no sense in an area like the Bay Area. It makes no sense in a city like San Francisco that our population is that low, and we have to change all of that.
Thank you. Starr, you have any, like, what does it look like if it works, if it's successful?
It looks like people my age won't go through the same, the future generations won't go through the same thing I did, or my family did, or people in this room did. Reparations could look like actually getting equal opportunities of having the same opportunities to go to a 4-year college. It looks like having equal health care, actually having effective health care that you won't get turned away at a hospital. It looks like black people actually buying homes again, because those Victorian homes in this city used to be black people used to live in them. Looks like black business owners, businesses blooming again. Yeah.
Thank you, Starr. Let's do Dr. Sai.
Yeah, I was once told wealth is having what you need when you need it. And so I think what I just heard is having what we need when we need it. And in many ways, decolonizing the way we think about success in the form of data and measurements, and believing us when we say, this is what I need for my own well-being. And that's success to me, in valuing that input from those we intend to serve. So, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. So as we, get ready to move into the next phase of this, I just wanted to kind of have you all go back. There is a tremendous, I talked initially about this initial investment of putting money towards the black community. And so there's the process where you made the money happen, then there's the process where we're trying to think about how you codify it or do this work around reparations. What would you say to someone that's like, I want to do that, right? Like, what are the things that are necessary or important for actually advancing either a racially focused agenda or initiative or effort, or to even just make a commitment to address social justice issues financially, monetarily? Like, what would you recommend in that? And then for you, Starr, like, even from that space, like, what do you think is important for pushing work like this? So as we think about it, we're up here, we're saying it, but let's be clear, there were challenges, there were barriers, but like, what would you say to folks? Be prepared for this, but these are the steps to do it. We can start with President Walton.
Okay. I mean, first you got to know what you want out of something and what you're asking for, right? So, and people have to have a common definition. A lot of times we get in a room and say we want something, but people are approaching it different, or we're not laser focused on the what. And so that becomes problematic, because you all fighting for something, but you're not fighting together. And something like reparations, we all have to be on the 100% same page. And that's why it was important enough to put a task force in place. It was important enough to allow time for input from community, because without that process and without getting to a point where we all know what we're talking about, we're on the same page, when it's time to ask for those resources, it's going to be problematic, because if we can't identify what we're talking about, and there are other people with issues, there are other people with disparities, and you can't identify what you're going to use resources that come from government entities, what you're going to use them for, that's going to be a problem. And that's another thing that we've had to be clear about in this process, because people are like, well, it's too city heavy. There's too many city people involved. I'm an elected official for the city and county of San Francisco. I don't have pots of money, right? So you're gonna have to go through a process with the city to get city resources. That's just the way it is. So when people try to say the city is involved in this conversation, yeah, I legislated it to make sure that that's the case. So that when I'm not in office anymore, right, this is indoctrinated in law. This was legislated. So when Supervisor Walton is gone, people have to continue to do this work. And that's the main focus for me and from my standpoint, and where I am at is to make sure that everything that I do in this role is written, that it becomes law, that it becomes something that is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to overturn and change. And you gotta have the same message, you gotta be on the same page when you're talking about resources if you wanna get resources.
So give it up for President Walton, because I don't know if folks are fully hearing what he's saying, because a lot of times politics is personality based, and folks come up with these great ideas that are resolutions, and resolutions actually are just something that says we should do this, whereas he's going through the process to make sure it doesn't matter whether there's a black mayor, a black person on the board of supervisors, that if you want to overturn what's done, you have to go through a process. That's not just like you come in next week and this is my new pet project. So he's made a commitment that's bigger than him, and I just want to really appreciate and respect that. Inside, outside game that folks were talking about yesterday, community pushes, but somebody has to be in the seat of authority to actually make it happen. So thank you for doing that.
Yes, and that's the recurring theme. Always both and, yes, and for me. I think I heard it yesterday. Get out of the way and listen. If we are intending to do work specifically for black folks and the black person is not leading that effort, it's a problem. If we are intending to do work specifically for Pacific Islanders and the Pacific Islander is not at the head of that work, it's a problem. If we are examining our boards and our organizations have equity initiatives and our boards are completely white, that's a problem. And so really, when will we get out the way and listen? And I was thinking along the lines of holding up the mirror to ourselves and also acknowledging. So I represent government, I work in government, which in every space that I enter, I acknowledge the years and decades of oppression that government has enacted in communities of color, specifically the black community in San Francisco. And so naming that, even though I am a black and Samoan woman, in this role, my only job is to listen to black folks and have black folks lead me, because the initiative is, to Supervisor Walton's point, unapologetically for black people in San Francisco and intentionally for black folks in San Francisco. And so from my perspective, as you all are examining your work and how you're doing the work, like, again, naming BIPOC, when we say BIPOC, who are we actually talking about? And instead of using that as a blanket kind of term for communities, looking at our leadership, specifically leadership, and if leadership doesn't look like who we are intending to serve, then that should also be reevaluated. And then funding distribution, looking at how funds are distributed to those organizations too. So it needs to be examined from in the entire ecosystem. I don't want to say levels because that perpetuates hierarchy, but we need to be examining the entire ecosystem from a perspective that is reflective of the folks that we intend to serve.
Thank you, Sai.
That's right.
So I'm going to ask you all to indulge me, because we talk about youth in spaces, we talk about celebrating young folks, and again, I'm going to, as we get ready to move to the next space, I want to provide space for Starr to speak. Starr is getting ready to graduate high school. Woo-hoo. She's already shared some of, without telling all her business, like the idea that she's had some challenges, right? And yet she's up here, and I feel like this is my, I was never a cheerleader in high school, was never gonna be one, but I feel like if I'm gonna cheerlead, I wanna cheerlead for folks like Starr Williams, right? And so I really feel like when we talk about, we were talking earlier about like young people sometimes face, when you talk about intersectionality, they face an additional layer of bias. Like how many of us have seen in our corner stores, only 3 students at a time can be in here, or all these other rules. And so when we see our young people, they are often ignored, invisible, or kind of dismissed. And so I like to try and make it a practice to be like, let's clap it up for them all the time. Let's have them feel like they deserve to be celebrated and recognized, and really just put forward. And so I want, like, as Starr is sharing all what she's sharing, for us to like act like she is, I mean, I don't know who y'all's favorite whatever is. She's Beyonce. Like Beyonce just started Homecoming, and we're like really feeling the vibe of all of that, because she doesn't know most of you. And so to be here and to be speaking, like, and to be sharing, like, she needs to feel like she's a rock star, because she is.
That's right.
So, and folks need to be okay with, because you know we do the thing and what, like, folks need to be okay with being celebrated. So I think you need to deserve that when people celebrate you, you don't have to apologize for it. You can just own that. And so in that regard, as we go to the next thing, Starr, like, what is the thing? Like, I know it's challenging. You've called us out as adults on, like, how we move through space or how we don't pause. So I just want to say, like, what's the thing that we all need to know as we talk about advancing these policies that ultimately are going to impact your life and your future?
Well, I want to say, like, listen to youth, like, because, like, youth are going through so much things, and sometimes adults be like, especially if a youth get kicked out of a store or something, they're like, oh, they were doing something bad. No, it's not, because they're looking at us like we are criminals. When we were born, we were already looked like we were criminals. Like, I got kicked out of the Target across the street just last year, and nothing, like, I really didn't get, like, attention for that. So, like, just listen to youth, listen to how they are experiencing life, because it can be important to change what they're going through.
Thank you, Starr.
And just real quick, if I can, Director Davis, I mean, it is important, you know, for Starr to realize she is a star, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at the fact that we have a 15-member reparations committee with 900,000 plus population and about, you know, 45,000 or so black folks, like, it's a big deal to be the young person that's serving on this reparations task force. That is historic. So that needs to be celebrated and understood.
And so earlier we talked a little bit about allyship and our partners. And so today we have 2 respondents. And so folks who know me know I love poetry. I used to be a kindergarten teacher, so I always think in song and rhyme. And I was thinking about, you know, as I get ready to invite Don to share up first, there's a Eloise Greenfield poem that says, I love a lot of things. Like, my cousin comes to visit, and you know he's from the South, because every word he says just kind of slides out of his mouth. I like the way he whistles, and I like the way he walks, but honey, let me tell you that I love the way he talks. I love the way my cousin talks. And so today, we're going to invite some of our cousins up here to talk and share and to really talk about how we are all family, right? That we are all trying to work towards the same solidarity, liberation, transformation, all of those things. And first up is Don Tamaki, who's done amazing work over the years around social justice. And Don, I like to introduce as the only non-black person on the statewide Reparations Task Force. So that is an honor in and of itself that he was selected to be a part of that statewide effort. He's done tremendous work for folks who were in the Japanese internment camps and fought and advocated and done some litigation in that regard, and now is doing similar work within the black community. So really does represent ally and accomplice all in one. So Don, if you would come up, thank you so much.
Dr. Davis, how am I supposed to follow that beautiful poem? And you've done a masterful job. Supervisor Walton, you are setting a model for the country. And I'm so pleased to be here with the other esteemed panelists. So I think my job is sort of to respond a little bit as an ally in this effort and fill you in a little bit about what the state of California is doing on the reparations front. I was very active in the redress for Japanese Americans for being incarcerated in concentration camps during World War II, including my own family and parents. And so we know a little bit about this. And when Dr. Davis talked about what's the benefit of reparations, and there's a litany of all of the suffering and all the ills that have happened. To be sure, all of those things have to be addressed. But the other benefit is changing the culture and the pathology that produces this, that victimizes black folks and re-victimizes them over and over again. And then that pathology spreads out and infects and impacts other people and other religious groups. So that's a little bit where I'm coming from. To Starr's point, you mentioned the problem of the numerical minority. That was our problem too, in getting redress and reparations passed for Japanese Americans. The tactical question which confronted us all is, how does a numerical minority create a national will to get legislation passed? And on the national level, the harm is so enormous, of 400 years of repression, 250 years of enslavement. Economists estimate that as between $14 trillion and $21 trillion. So this is a national effort as well as a local one. So make no mistake about it, we talk about what's happening in San Francisco, in the state of California, but we're talking about starting a movement. And movements begin in conversations just like this. And when we talk about youth being involved, I can imagine a young Shamann Walton or a young Cheryl Davis and what they must have been like in their youth as activists. And every social movement of importance in this modern world, whether it's civil rights or environment or women's rights or other things, the youth, young people were central to that effort. The change would have never happened without young people being involved, whether it's civil rights movement, Little Rock Nine, and so on. So the question to me is, this is daunting to be sure, but it's been done before. The first civil rights movement occurred in the 10-year period following Reconstruction after the Civil War, resulting in the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the Constitution. The second civil rights movement happened in the 1960s, resulting in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And in 1988, Congress, for our community, passed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, providing redress and atonement payments for Japanese Americans incarcerated in concentration camps. Can we make reparations a mainstream issue? I think that's the heart of the question. For Japanese Americans, the key was shining a light to uncover buried and forgotten, willfully forgotten history, to transform my community's issue into an American issue of justice and democracy. Similarly, while today's reparations movement must be led by black leaders and the focus must be on the harmed class of African Americans, it is not a black issue. It is an American issue about the soul of the country. So why do I say that? Why is reparations about the soul of the country? Because the history of enslavement and each iteration of racism that followed has impacted every aspect of American society. Slavery established the racial hierarchy. Enslavement has existed for thousands of years, but it is only in the last 400 to 500 years that white Europeans developed a type of enslavement based on skin complexion, which became the basis for lifelong enslavement, passing from parent to child, and supported by a belief system of white superiority. Once the culture dehumanizes people, in the words of Martin Luther King, thingifying them to the level of pigs and goats, any manner of crimes against humanity is possible. What followed then was 250 years of enslavement, 90 years of Jim Crow, in 60 years of racial exclusion. And if you can do that to black folks, other racial and religious groups and people are fair game. Whether Asian Americans, Latinos, LGBTQ, Muslims or Jews, and so on. While the canon of prejudice and exclusion has always been pointed at African Americans, throughout America's history, other groups have been in the crosshairs from time to time as well. And the origin of these cultural values are traceable back to 1619. So where do we go from here? The city of San Francisco is one example about what local organizers are doing. There are about 30 truth and reconciliation commissions across this country and shining a light on this dark history. I'm one of 9 members, as Dr. Davis has said, appointed by the governor and the legislature to serve on the California Reparations Task Force. And it's the first and hopefully not the only state initiative of its kind. The purpose of the task force is to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans, to recommend appropriate ways to educate the public and recommend remedies and in consideration of those findings. So in June, this is in a couple weeks from now, the task force will release part 1 of an interim report detailing the generational harm of enslavement and the evolving iterations of racial oppression that followed, leading to today's consequences that Supervisor Walton talked about in housing, employment, criminal justice, healthcare, the racial wealth gap, and so on. The report is scholarly and comprehensive, over 600 pages and 13 chapters. In my humble opinion, the report is groundbreaking, the first significant government report on race since the Kerner Commission report in 1968. Where do we go from here? Exposing the historical pathology leading to today's consequences is essential. Some folks say that we don't need another study bill. We've studied enough, we know what happened. I said that too, frankly, in the beginning of the Japanese American redress and reparations movement. I was wrong. The vast majority, and I'm talking in the 90% range, of Americans have no idea of the breadth and depth of the harm, and most importantly, its resulting impact today. The fact that the Tulsa Massacre in Greenwood, Black Wall Street, is current news despite it happening like 100 years ago is a testament to the extent that the culture has buried and erased this history. And one of the things about the report is we find there are lots of Greenwoods. There are lots of Tulsas, not only throughout the nation, but in California. So this is a room full of activists, policymakers, educators, and thought leaders from all over the country. It is my hope that you seize upon at least this first report, which will be public, which covers the history of a number of states, both North and South, to spread this information and use it as an organizing tool. In my day, we would stage teach-ins and push it to be part of curriculum. In today's world, all of that is true, but also artistic works, graphic books, and other means of moving the needle of public opinion are possible. So it is my hope that what's happening in San Francisco under the leadership of Dr. Davis and President Walton, and what's happening in the state of California will be replicated. So whatever, inertia that's going on in Congress, there'll be a local effort that eventually will bubble up. And I thank you for your interest and for having me. Thanks.
Thank you. John, can you put that seat down? So our next respondent is affectionately called by many Mama Bear because she takes care of everyone. But I'm gonna actually invite Valerie Tulier-Laiwa up. Give Valerie a hand. Bring your cloth because I'm gonna give you the. Today I'm gonna call her the queen, and I'm gonna give her this throne so she can sit here because I know she wants to. That's right. Look, Valerie wants to make sure. It's up to you, but
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. All right.
You got it?
Oh,
Go.
all right, you want me to talk? Okay, I thought it was going to be a Q&A. But I do want to just begin by grounding my presence here amongst all of you. I would like to start with the land acknowledgement of the people who are from this land. And I would ask respectfully to just put your cell phones down for a moment and just focus on this land acknowledgement. We, the Aspen Institute attendees, acknowledge that we are in the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. Aho. So thank you for allowing me to ground us in a land acknowledgement. And I also like to do further grounding, and that is a couple of things I need to say and get out of the way. First, I come here with permission. Doesn't matter if I'm a little bit older, but I ask permission. I consider myself an indigenous Latina, and but I don't just I'm not from here, so I ask California people if I can be here. I asked April McGill, the executive director for the American Indian Cultural Center, permission to speak today. I called the Shakeyla O'Cain from the executive director for the American Indian Cultural District and asked her permission to speak on behalf. I asked my husband, who is California native from the Wailaki and Kashayan nations of California, asked him permission. So I come with permission to be here and to speak. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And now I'm asking you permission to speak. I'm asking for you to allow me to have permission and the honor to the younger generation, that this be a multi-generational space, but that I can offer you whatever words I have today. So in that, I just want to share with you a couple of things. I didn't have really a prepared speech, but I will say that we are bound by the effects of oppression to live together and be together. Contrary to what internalized oppression looks like or how it wants us to behave, we counter that with our reality and with solidarity. What happens to one group eventually happens to another. I want to say, and I often do the 4 directions, and when we face the West, and the way I've been taught the West is represented by the Black nation and the color black, I often stop at that direction and say, Black lives matter. Black lives matter. You see, when Black community and the Black nation is uplifted, we all benefit. We all succeed. We all are better people. And I want to show an example of that. You know what, I'm going to stand up, actually. I'm going to take this space here. Let me know if the mic is okay. But I just want to say this. There's an example. For decades, the Native community has been protesting around the racist names of sports teams. The Washington Redskins, the, the Kansas City Chiefs, the, the Atlanta Braves, for decades. But not until George Floyd sacrificed his life did we get final recognition. That's when racist statues were torn down. That's when the Washingtons became what the Washington, I don't know, Patriots or Compatriots, whatever the hell it is. Who cares? But you know, not until George Floyd, He did not know at that moment that he was going to help an entire country and all BIPOC communities. And so as an Indigenous perspective, we honor and we stand in solidarity with the Black movement, always, always. In the 60s, there's always reference, and forgive us young people in your 20s and under, you're always gonna hear about the civil rights movement, you're gonna hear it over and over again, but it's okay, it's okay. You need to know your history, you need to know where you've been so you know where you're going, right? And so I'll tell you, in the 60s, it was the Black movement, the civil rights movement, that helped us get it together. Without the Black Panthers, there would not have been any Chicano movement. Without the Black Panthers, I promise you, there would not have been an American Indian movement. There were movements all over because of Black leadership. And that's why we stand in solidarity. That's why we have always stood in solidarity. I want to just share with you in San Francisco. It's very interesting, you know, these new words that get termed up as we grow. But solidarity, really, when I grew up in San Francisco, was just about living together. We live together. San Francisco's small. Our communities, we can tell you, we had Black friends, Filipino friends, Latino friends, Samoan friends. We all live together. If you want to call that the precursor to solidarity, then that's fine, because you know what? As we got older, we knew who to call on. We knew who to talk to because we grew up together. I want to just talk a little bit about, you know, what we do. I brought my jacket here, the Latino Task Force. As I said, I consider myself an Indigenous Latina. I grew up more in the Latino culture, and we work in solidarity. But I do want to say one thing before I talk about that. No, I'll just say that real quick. So the Latino Task Force, what we did was we grew up together, all of us. We grew up together, and we knew when the pandemic hit, we said, heck, this is going to hit the Latino community hard. We didn't have any data to show it. We didn't have any proof yet, but we knew instinctively. So we got together and said, how are we going to respond to this pandemic? And so we started. We started this health issue around getting testing. We started with Ruth's leadership, the Latino Task Force resource hubs to give face-to-face services, because we knew our people, and we started the Mission Food Hub. And we knew for a fact that if our people stood 4 hours in line to get food, we can stand and open up an office and have face-to-face encounters with them. We were not afraid. We were not this damn entitled kind of people that, I don't want to get sick, my staff's going to sick. The hell if you don't. You better go on and run into that fire instead of run away from the fire. And we did that. And then we shared that. We shared our model. We shared it with the Black community. We shared it with the Pacific Islander community. In fact, right now, in Bayview, Hunters Point, they have several hubs together, run and led by Black people. But we also supported the Pacific Islander because we understand the political power we had. We shared our political power. We said, give some of that money. So now we don't have a hub, we call it the hut. Pacific Islander community says, oh no, we're gonna open up a resource hub, but we're gonna call it the hut. You do you, that's culturally appropriate for me, I can work with that, absolutely. But we don't dare make any moves in any of our communities in San Francisco without asking permission. We know who the go-to people are, the real ones. And I just want to talk about that. You all have the opportunity and the blessing to have Dr. Cheryl Davis, to have President Shamann Walton. As politicians, they're real. You know, there's a saying I've heard, what is it called? Skin folk are not always kin folk, right? Right? Keep it real, you know, and so we have to be careful about that. When you all are advocating, especially young people, it's not just about advocating for Latinos, advocating for Blacks, advocating for Asians, advocating for Pacific Islanders. It's who you're advocating for. Because if you're in a position of power and you're doing nothing for my community, you are no good. I don't care if your last name is Sanchez, Garcia, whatever it may be. So we are blessed because, as they said earlier, because they didn't say it, I was going to say it. President Shamann Walton, Dr. Cheryl Davis are unapologetic. But guess what? They grew up in the city, or they've lived in the city long enough to be connected to community. Because no, you have to have community relationships. Relationships, relationships, relationships. Because if they try to go after them, they're going to have to come after all of us. Because that's how it is. That is just how it is. So that's important to have your relationships and to have your backing. So I think, let me see, I have lots and lots of notes here. I just want to say here that our experiences are similar. Our life experience may be called different things, but they are similar. The health disparities that we have, the health disparities that the Black community has, we all have it. We don't have access to good health care. We all have experience of forced sterilization in the Native, the Latino, and the Black community. Our kids have been removed from us. They were removed from Black families during slavery. They've been removed from Indigenous people and forced on these treacherous boarding schools. And so I want to say the removal of children, even recently in recent decades, these social workers come into our homes and they think they know what they're doing is best for us, but no, we know what's best. Keep our kids with our family. If I can't take care of them, I got auntie here who's going to take care of them. Stop removing our kids from homes. So these are the strategies. This is the MO of the system. And that is what we have to do. We have to change the systems. We have to change the systems. And I ask you, I learned a phrase the other day, are you about moving mountains or are you about making waves? So whatever noise you're making, make sure you're moving a mountain, all right? So in closing, I just want to say a couple of things here. I'd like to leave you with a couple of things here. One, as I said earlier, be careful with your demands. It is not okay just to get a person of color in the position. Put expectations, job descriptions, interview questions to get the right person. There's a saying, they say, buy local, well, hire local. Okay, I'm so sick of, I work for the city, so if I could work for the city, I could talk about the city, okay? But I'm so tired of the city hiring all these people who go to these prestigious colleges, nothing wrong with that, but they also come from other cities. How are you going to do policies that impact my community if you don't even know my community? So if I say buy local, hire local. And then I leave you with one little simple thing here, and that is an interview question. And I challenge anybody, I don't care who you interview, for what position, you even make your local government officials incorporate this question, this interview question. And I will give credit to the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. They're based in New Orleans. They do an Undoing Racism training, and that training changed my life. But the simple question for hire is, why are people poor? Why are people poor? And the reason you ask that is whatever comes out of their mouth will tell you volumes, about how effective of a community organizer they'll be, how effective a teacher will be, how effective a board of supervisors will be, because depending on that answer, if they blame us, if they try to victimize poor people, they ain't the one. Tear up their resume right then and there. Oh, thank you, see you later. But if they talk to you about systems of oppression and how to dismantle it, oh, well, you can come work with us. You got a good analysis. So I just want to thank you for your time. I didn't have a prepared speech, but I did have prepared points. And thank you for allowing me to be here today. Thank you.
We're going to ask you to take a few minutes at your table to kind of talk about what resonated, to come up. We're only going to have time for maybe a couple of questions afterwards, but talk at your tables for a couple minutes, maybe come up with a question or a thought or something you'd like to share with the panel. So time starts now. All right. So again, thank you all so much for indulging us and listening to us kind of go through this conversation. We are going to take, I think, about 10 to 15 minutes we have if there are any questions, comments, thoughts for the panel. See in the back, far back there. Thank you.
I know, these lights
And I want to thank, while we're doing that, our wonderful AV support and the good folks who have been helping serve the food and helping
Yes.
clean up behind us. Thank you all so much for your support and work. And to our microphone runners who are getting their steps in today. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to talk about allyship and what was mentioned earlier. And one thing that resonated with me was how you were speaking about your pain is my pain and your joy is my joy. I'm also Indigenous Latina. And one thing that I constantly think about in the allyship with my Black relatives is the one-drop rule relating to blood quantum and how that's related in reparations in relationship to honoring the treaties. And really we can't, there might be some of my people who are like, oh, why were we talking about reparations when treaties aren't even honored yet? Or in the vice versa, but we can't get anywhere if we're still dividing each other and still working against each other. These are two sides of the same coin of oppression. So I just want to say that that resonated with me, and your joy is my joy. Thank you for fighting this good fight.
Thank you. I think that was Desiree back there. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if I know you were acknowledging Desiree, but did anyone want to respond to that, or should we just go to the next question? Just next question. Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Don. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if this is working, but I
Yeah.
appreciate that observation. There's a couple things going on at the state task force level that, frankly, we've been wrestling with, and that is the community of eligibility in respect to lineage, in particular, to descendants of American slavery, as opposed to anti-Black hatred. And that discussion will go on. I mean, on the one hand, clearly there's an unrecognized, injured, harmed, unacknowledged class of people and their descendants and families from the institution of slavery. The other part is what Supervisor Walton so eloquently talked about, and that is anti-Black policy and racism that impacts policing, healthcare, housing, employment, just about every aspect of American society that's not traceable to lineage. It's just based upon Blackness. I don't know that Derek Chauvin cared whether George Floyd was a descendant of American slavery or was simply Black. And I think it was the latter. That's the only thing that mattered. So that's a debate that's going to go on. The other piece of it, as I think other people mentioned, that when you change the culture, really the underlying, where does the hate come from? And it goes back, I believe, to 1619 and earlier. But once we uncover that, change the culture, it shines a light on everything else. So I think to your point, I really appreciate what you're saying. Your pain is my pain. You know, of course, it's the right thing to do. It's the just thing to do. It's the American thing to do. But it also is within our own self-interest to change this culture.
Yeah.
So I would say that.
Thank you, Don. There's a hand over here, and then there's one over there, too. And just that question about the 1% drop is also a debate in terms of who gets reparations. And folks have said, for folks, like if you think about Thomas Jefferson had folks that knew that they were the lineage of Thomas Jefferson and some who didn't, but some who could pass for white. Do the folks who got to pass for white get to come back and get reparations?
Thank you. Starr, I was so struck by your story, your educational story, and the fight that your mother had made for you, the choices she had to make to give you a quality public education. And it made me reflect on my own education in California, going to public schools, going to a majority white public school district, and the false narrative we have around, for example, Brown v. Board versus education. What I was taught, and I think what a lot of students are taught, is that ended segregation. And now black students have access to the same opportunities as white students. And what we don't talk about is that we had thriving schools that were in under-resourced buildings, without supplies, without toilets sometimes, without tables and chairs, but they had black teachers, and they created culturally affirming spaces for black students. And so what we got with Brown v. Board was an opportunity to assimilate into schools that center white middle-class students. And so I'm curious, in your reflections about through the Reparations Committee, or just through your own history and lived experience, how you are thinking about public schooling and the role of K-12 public schools, and what does reparations look like for black students in K-12 public schools?
Thank you.
So as we know, like Lowell is a pretty prestigious public school in the city, and it's a low percentage of black people in there, and it had a prestigious test, admission, and black people were the lowest people to go to that school. So I feel like the Brown versus, segregation in San Francisco still happens today. Like if it's a black school in a black area, black people are most likely to go there, and it's very hard for black students to go to schools in different areas. Like you have to have a specific criteria to go to a white school or a school that wasn't in the person's area. And so I feel like through reparations committee, we can start having these curriculums, or also allowing black students to go to any school that they want to, but also with curriculum to teach students, all type of students, about how black people affected the school system. Like the Black Panthers started the free breakfast program, and guess what? In California, breakfast is free for people that are low income, which is the majority of people that go to public school. So having this type of education will help students and also teachers and administrations to realize what they're doing wrong in the system.
Thank you, Starr.
Yeah, and I just want to say, it's real simplistic for me as someone who went to a historically black college and university. Like, all we have to do is take all of the black leaders and black teachers that care about black students, put them all in a school, and give them the resources they need to educate them, and those young people will be successful.
That's right.
It's real simplistic, right? But nobody wants to take on that kind of bold change, but it's really that simple.
Yeah. Thank you, President Walton. I know there was one other hand there, and I would just say for folks, there's a new book out called The Jim Crow Pink Slip, which highlights the fact that Jim Crow era had all these black folks that were committed and investing and teaching young people, and that when Jim Crow ended and when Brown versus Board of Education desegregated schools, we lost black excellence in the classroom in some way, which directly impacted education, which again supports what President Walton is saying. If we bring that back, we can see some of that education really rise the way it did during segregation.
Thank you so much for this. I am on a journey to be a better ally every day, and so I'd like some help. It was very helpful to start to hear some of the ideas about what reparations, how it might be defined and what it might look like. And President Walton, you gave some very powerful examples. Can you give me more tools or more ammunition to take back to white communities or other communities where people say, this is so big, it's so hard, we can't do it? So other things that I and people like me can say to help start to unpack it and start to understand, yes, we can do it, here's how we're going about it, here's what it might mean, here's what it might look like.
Thank you.
I mean, it's hard for me to answer because I'm black, right? So, and this is what I mean. Like, I think Saeeda gave a very good answer in response to that, right? Like, we need allies to show up and let us lead in our own fights, in our own battles, and let us provide where we need you to engage and where we want to work together. I mean, it's real simple. Nobody in here is going to go to someone in the low-income community and ask them how to be rich. You're not going to do that. Nobody in here is going to go to a librarian and ask them to diagnose when you're sick, right? You're going to go to a doctor when you need to be healed. You're going to go to somebody rich when you want to learn how to be rich. So it's the same thing. If you want to learn how to work with black people, you got to talk to black people and let black people tell you what they need, or any community. You know, I'm fortunate enough to have strong ties and relationships in the Latino community, in the Asian community. But most certainly will I never go in that community and disrespect the leadership and the culture and try to act like I have the responses for what needs to be done. If I have young Latino folks approach me, young Asian folks approach me, I am going to go talk to the leaders and the elders in that community and ask them, what can we do to support this young person? Or, of course, naturally connect that young person to them. So it's really listening to what people say they need support in and engaging in that way. So if we say, you know, we need resources to carry out the work, how can you help us do that? If we say, you know, we need you to work to educate people that look like you, that don't understand and don't have the information, like Don was talking about, in terms of why it is so important to have reparations, why we care and why we're concerned, why this has been a conversation that has been going on for hundreds of years. Like that piece is important, and we need allies, of course, to be able to deliver that message and be able to communicate that. You know, the best way to engage really is to listen to the folks who are doing the work that look like the community, of the community, and really listen to what they're asking for support in. Because I gotta say this. Just for example, when we carved out the $120 million for the black community, right? You know, I had a lot of leaders of organizations come to me, people who weren't black, their organizations weren't black. And they come to me and say, you know, I heard about this Dreamkeeper initiative money, and we serve black people. So what can I do to get some money? I said, I don't make decisions in that aspect, but I'm gonna tell you right now, if it's up to me, you ain't getting shit. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's the reality. So that's what we don't need from
Welcome
from
to all
allies.
the meetings we have with.
That's what we don't need from allies, right? That actually pisses me off when people do stuff like that. So, you know, you listen to folks who need the support and engage that way.
I mean, give it up for President Walton, because what I will say is that he has stayed true to himself and stayed true to community and showed up in those spaces and said the things that other folks wish people would say. And so I would also just add to that, I think, to build on what he said in terms of how to do this, ultimately it is about how do we partner and show up in spaces together? So instead of convening your own group to advance reparations, connect with folks that want to do that are doing that and leading that work, and say, how do we do this together? How do you amplify those voices? Because so often the work gets co-opted. So I know we are kind of at time, but Saeeda, were you going to add?
I was going to add to what President Walton said, yes, and self-educate. There are so many books out there. How to be anti-racist, why I'm no longer explaining racism to white people, black feminist books that are out there. Black folks are exhausted, educated non-black folks about how to serve black people. We are tired, we are exhausted, and there are just too many books out there to not know the information. And respect that. Respect our exhaustion. Respect that we've been doing this work and are still doing this work, and that we want to do this work in our way. So do not get self-educated and then turn around and say, "Oh, I read this book and it told me this is how I should help you." No, that's not what I'm saying. But definitely do that work first, and then come talk to us.
Can I just add something?
Yes. And then you got 25 seconds.
I just want to add on something really quickly. Give us access to what you have access to. Give us access to the tables that you're at. Advocate for whatever it may be, a commission, a board of directors you're on, school board you're on, whatever it is. Use your access to resources and get us there. Say, oh, no, I don't see any Indigenous representation, Black representation, Asian. We're not moving this commission further until we get us on the board, get them on the board. So give us access. Give us access to what you have access to.
Now
Thank
you see
very
why
much.
I like to go to work every day, because I get to work with these amazing people. Can you give it up for this panel and these great folks? Thank you all so much for this opportunity, and thank you all for participating today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so we believe in starting and ending on time, so we're going to do that. That's what's going to happen. But I want to actually start by asking you just one more time, please, to show some love to Dr. Davis and to the panelists. Yes, thank you. Expressing love, expressing gratitude, expressing joy, those are our values. And I want to just say this. I appreciate it so much. That conversation enriched my soul. And I love the through line around shared vision, shared language, but most important, shared solidarity. So I want to just thank them for bringing home our opening plenary and weaving those themes together in such a beautiful place-based way. And then the other thing I want to return to are some of the questions that have undergirded our time together here. Even in the opening plenary, one of the core questions was this question of what have we learned? What have we learned in the 10 years doing this work? What have we learned in the 2.5 years during the pandemic? And maybe most importantly, what have we learned across the generations of doing this work? There's this other question, which is the one that I raised in my opening. Who is your time at this convening dedicated to? And we've heard different people here on stage answer that question, who specifically, mostly relatives, they would have dedicated their time here to. But I want to invite you all to think about this question in the context of the legacy of your work. And that's another thing I appreciated about this panel, connecting it to our ancestors, the present and the future. So think back to the conversations from yesterday and today, including the themes of narrative, story, vision, shared language, and solidarity. Think about who your work is for. Think about your vision, and specifically this idea, and again, our opening plenary did this so beautifully. Who is your labor making room for? What values will you pass down as you're supporting and lifting up the next generation? Who will your work impact, and what will the legacy of your work be? And how is your time here, and especially when you return home, dedicated to how you, throughout the arc of your career, will be answering this question? And finally, and this question I have to credit to Judge Abby from the Del Norte, I have to credit to Judge Abby from Del Norte and Tribal Lands. So for those of you who had the pleasure of meeting Judge Abby today, or for just anyone who knows her from the community, then you know of her wisdom, her expertise, her legacy, you know of her soul. And today we had an opportunity to be in dialogue with her, and she shared her vision for not just community-rooted justice, but how community-rooted justice really is at the center of culture and values, and how family and children together, they undergird that. And the question Judge Abby asked me the first time I talked to her, and then she asked again in our session today, this is the third question I want you to hold. This is the question of, how do I become a good ancestor? So yeah, I'm gonna say the question one more time. How do I become a good ancestor? And whatever the answer to that question is, you are probably defining it daily in this work that you are doing. And so I wanted to invite you all to hold that question as we wrap up our time here today. As we think about the future of our work, as we think about everything from the practices to the policies, but most important, the way that we show up in solidarity with and love, actively love others. And then here's the story that I want to close with. So yesterday when Fred Blackwell was talking, I was like, if there's time, I'm going to ask him to share this question, but there wasn't time. Or I'm going to ask him to share this story, but there wasn't time. So in one of our planning conversations, Angela had just gone to speak somewhere, and she said, Fred, you wouldn't believe this, that, you know, I was talking, but all everybody wanted to talk about was you, and how, like, 10 years ago, you had given a speech, and the thing that, like, changed how they saw the world doing racial equity, racial justice work was coffee beans. And so, of course, we're listening, you know, me and the Aspen team, and we said, okay, but we can't continue this conversation, Fred, unless you tell us this coffee bean story. Here's the coffee bean story. And, you know, Fred, of course, he attributed to a local organizer here in San Francisco, and I'm going to apologize because I don't remember his name, but maybe the family from San Francisco, when I tell the story, you will honor this organizer's name. But this is the story. In doing this community organizing work and trying to build a movement that lasts and achieves impact across generations, sometimes the way that we approach it is like being a rock. So if you have a rock and you put a rock in water, what happens is that that rock displaces the water. But the water itself, it doesn't change. So if you take the rock back out of the water, then you've just lost a little bit of space, but nothing really about that water has changed. This organizer said when we're doing our work must be like a coffee bean. Because if you were to put a coffee bean in water, yes, it would displace, right? But it would also change the color of the water. And it would change the taste and the flavor of the water. And of course, if you left it in there for some time, it would also change the consistency of the water. And I'm telling you that story because what the organizer imparted on Fred, and I want to leave with you all, is that in our solidarity, we must be the millions of coffee beans that are not just changing the water, yes, for our children, for future generations, but as we are doing that, we know that collectively we're making the world more equitable and just, and we get to leave future generations a planet, a sustainable planet, if all together we are these coffee beans. So hold these questions in your heart, in your mind, especially this question of how do I become a good ancestor, yes? And then how are we together in our solidarity and how we love each other, these coffee beans. Thank you.
Anybody else want to go get some French press coffee with me now? I love that. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Fred, wherever you are. Thank you to the organizer who came up with that. How about it for Monique Miles, everybody? I think this is like the 15th time I've said it to her, but you did it again. So great gathering. Thanks, everybody. My job is both to close this out and just really quickly do the, man, what do we got for you next? But I also wanted to test Ruth's solidarity by wearing my Celtics hat up here, because, you know, where's the watch party tonight? Go Celtics, right, Boston table? I grew up in Massachusetts. I'm sorry. I can't help myself. I feel the solidarity. There might be a watch party until we get to the championship. All right, I digress. I was like, thank God we don't have Miami in the Opportunity Youth Forum. No, that's not right. That's not right. If you guys know a good backbone down there, we'll partner with them. All right, I digress. So a lot of you know that we've been focused on equity from the beginning. You know, the first plenary Monique ever put together was on structural and systemic racism 9 years ago. And we were going to go through it. We weren't going to go around race. And we've been working on that. And it's always a work in progress. And you know that we've been inequitable in our equity work. There have not been enough folks from rural communities and from indigenous, native communities in this network. We're growing that. We're very intentionally working to bring more partners in and to learn from them. And we, years ago, got invited to visit folks at Hopi. I think Hopi was here earlier and had to catch a flight, multiple flights to get back to Hopi, and then a 2-hour drive from the Flagstaff airport, maybe 3 hours. I mention that because what an honor and a privilege to be invited to visit Hopi as a network. Add to it the honor and privilege that Kevin Shendo and folks at Jemez Pueblo. Shendo, will you raise your hand so people can come ask you about? We've been invited to the Jemez Pueblo Feast Day. Now that's a big deal too. So, and that's real and that's meaningful. So in November, instead of going out, hanging out in bougie Aspen, we're gonna do this trip to visit the Hopi community and to ultimately end up at this cool place called the Tamaya, which is a resort that's on Santa Ana Pueblo's land next to the Rio Grande in New Mexico. It's gonna be cool. We're gonna retreat together. We're gonna have a lot of learning like this. Not as many plenaries, not as many breakout sessions. It's gonna look a little different. And so I just wanna encourage y'all to come. Most of us, the network's gonna show up in Albuquerque for the last 3 days of that gathering, and we really built it around the opportunity to go to the feast day, which happens on the same day every year. And those of you who are kind of diehard, like Kathy from Boston, who comes to everything, you know, and who's like, oh, really, you wanna do like a 2-hour bus ride followed by a site visit, followed by a 5-hour bus ride, followed by like dehydration and other things? So those of you who are game can also, and you know, at the last plenary on the last day of a packed agenda, you're the game folks. So just let us know, like say, we were at that last plenary, you're in. But a subgroup of us is gonna do the road trip. We're gonna go and, you know, and we're gonna go spend some time in Flag, go out to Hopi, and trek across into New Mexico, and then spend some time in the Pueblo communities. And so that's the plan for November, and I wanted to name it. I also wanted to say, like, if travel is stressful and if long bus rides and other things are barriers, it's cool. Meet us in New Mexico, and we'll tell you about the part where we were in Arizona. But it's really, I think, a real privilege to be invited and to have this opportunity. So assuming health, assuming that the tribes say it's 100% safe and cool, that's what's coming in November, so stay tuned, and we hope you'll all join us. And many of you have been meeting in this space with folks from those communities for years now, and might want to get to see them in their own home community welcome us. So I really want to appreciate the invitation from Hopi, appreciate the invitation from Jemez, and encourage y'all to, let's get back together in November. And with that, thank you to the Forum Fam team. Raise your hand. Thank you to Aspen Conference Services. Thank you to the folks who have been feeding us, caring for us, taking care of us here.
Thank you to
What's that? JFF, thank you. Thank you to the hostesses, what's plural? The hosts with the most. San Francisco, thank you.
Thank you to Ruth and Dr. Davis.
All right. Thank you to Ruth and Dr. Davis, which I just did that, but I'll say it again. Thank you, Ruth and Dr. Davis. Ruth and Dr. Where did Dr. Davis go? Dr. Davis, thank you. Anybody else? All right, you say meeting adjourned then. All right.
Meeting adjourned. We love y'all.
Yeah.
See you later this year.